you can also find us on Twitter. So, okay, let's start. I'm gonna pass the microphone to Caroline, which is helping me with think. Caroline, you cannot see her tonight because her dog basically broke her camera. So no, we are in London, so yeah, it's usually like that. So she's going to introduce the topic of tonight and our speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosella. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speakers today, who are going to talk about such an important topic: sustainable fashion, ways to support the fashion revolution. So today we have with us Mari Pierce. She's a senior finance analyst at Burberry. We have Eleonora Mongelli. She's a human rights expert and vice president of the Italian Federation for Human Rights. And Emily Jane Shepherd, environmental activist at Extinction Rebellion Fashion Action. Thank you for participating in these events, ladies, and over to you, Rosella.
Great. So I'm so happy to have you tonight, because I know, and I was saying to Eleonora and Mary just before starting this live, that I'm quite nervous about this topic because it's such an important topic and it's so difficult sometimes to grasp and explain how complex is the issue. So I want to before starting with the question, I want to start to give a little bit of information about the impact of fast fashion on the environment and human rights. So the fast fashion industry emits 1.2 billion tons of CO2 per year. That is basically more than air, travel, and shipping combined. Additionally, it produces 20% of global wastewater, which is contaminating our rivers, ocean, drinking water, and soil. With that comes unfair human health conditions and extremely low wages for workers. So the entire fast fashion system is devaluating both the people behind the clothing and the well-being of our planet. In 2020, a research showed that over 37% of Brits, so people that live in United Kingdom, agreed that the retailers that placed greater emphasis on sustainability were more appealing. But at the same time, it's no secret that the fast fashion is currently booming. But this raises the question as to why the sector remained popular at the time when the demand for sustainability is on the rise. So it's kind of weird. So we see that people is actually up to buy from brands that are, like they're trying to do the right things on a sustainable issue, but then at the same time they keep buy from Zara, H&M, Boohoo, Topshop, Primark. So obviously we're not going to talk badly about any brand tonight. It's just to give an idea of the impact of fast fashion. And on that level, the first question that I want to ask is to Mari, which is actually a retail expert. Mari works for Burberry, so we're talking about fashion label, but she's also been working in the retail fashion for several years. So what are the main problems you see in the fashion sector today, Mari?
So thank you for having me here tonight. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. I'm really passionate about sustainability and planet, and I'm really pleased that this is the Earth Day where we're actually choosing to talk about it. So I think that in just thinking about main areas, I think of main pillars, if you can subdivide in terms of the current issues, I think they have the massive issues with the emissions. Of course, there's what you mentioned in the beginning. You have the massive amount of waste, which is a massive problem. You have the lack of transparency, and then you have the materials in terms of how we deal with them and so on. And then the lack of regulation. So, for example, going to the waste side, there is always room for improvement on how companies manage the stocks, because these will actually define how much waste will be and actually as a waste. So in terms of fast fashion, it could be also another massive generator of waste, because we have some of the companies, the high street companies, that they will have multiple seasons. It's like something new pretty much almost every week, which you can see that clearly cannot be sustainable this way. Also, if you think about the life cycle of the materials and so on, is much less durable than what we had in the past. So you can see that like nowadays, if you compare from clothes that you had in the past and what you have now, sometimes they don't last like not even like 1 year and so on. And then you have, in my opinion, there is the multiple discounted periods. I think UK and the US is particularly bad. You have like, it feels like sometimes to me as a customer, they were almost like pretty much like on sales period. And of course, from the point of like from the company and working finance, it's not even something that is good for us, because then it is a way to exit stock rather than having like waste, but at the same time doesn't really like help us in terms of margin. So I don't think it's like something good, right? In terms of emissions, if you think about, I think the supply chain can be quite complicated in terms of, you have the packaging issue, you have the transportation in terms of like air, or you know that the sea freight is cheaper and so on than actually like the air freight. But sometimes you have in fashion like short like a time frame to then deliver something, so you end up actually having to use the air freight. You have like the overall emissions in terms of like just transportation and issues on the production, how we actually deal with this. And then in terms of my next point was like materials, and then you see sometimes even the companies want to recycle materials. Sometimes they can be made of, or the product can be made of various types of materials, so it can be difficult to break it apart and then recycle every single one, or becomes very costly and so on. And then you have, for example, the chemicals that are used for to get to a specific color, a specific type for one season, sometimes can pollute waters, and it requires sometimes like a lot of water. When you see, for example, cotton, which it requires a lot of water, and so on. And in terms of transparency, I think that there is lack of transparency from the customer point of view in terms of what do we see, how do we know actually what we're buying, and then sometimes it's not that visible, even if you want to make the right choice. And then in terms of transparency from the company point of view, you have so many different tiers on the supply chain, and sometimes you're trying to go as far as you can, so you work with one supplier and they work with other supplier, and then there is just so much you can really like be able to trace. So this can be always an additional like level of complication that you can have. And then in terms of like lack of regulation, I think in finance we seem to have a few different frameworks for that, which I'll talk about a bit later. But then in general, now you can see the like EU Parliament and the UK Parliament, they've been trying to make their enforceable in terms of how we actually, by when we need to be offsetting and be carbon neutral and so on. But in comparison to other industries, I think the fashion now is a hot topic. Now is actually like being discussed. But you have other like the gas industry, the car industry, they've been in a lot more pressure than until now. And then I think the fashion now is becoming a bit more in the eye of the media, to then make some changes and try to become more sustainable quicker.
It becomes in the eye of the media because it's also the second most, is the second industry that creates the most pollution in the world. So after oil, so it's quite crazy. And you were talking about regulation, and this is what brings me to the next question to Eleonora, because like lately, recently the European Parliament added pressure by voting for a report on corporate due diligence and corporate accountability. So can you tell us a little bit more? Because Mary was talking about more on the regulation on the side of like emission, but can you tell us a little bit more what it means for example, for human rights and workers, this new regulation that European Parliament is talking about and is voting?
Okay, thanks so much, Rossella. And as Mari has anticipated, yes, the lack of transparency is one of the main issues. And I said last March, for the first time, the European Parliament adopted with a large majority a resolution calling on the European Commission to draft a new legislation on corporate due diligence and accountability on human rights and This resolution includes reporting obligations for the companies, such as publishing due diligence strategy in their website, but also in a European centralized platform, which would be related. And supervision investigations conducted by the relevant authorities, guidelines for companies, sanctions, and civil liability adopted for non-compliance. So this is a significant step in the right direction, as if this legislation will be adopted and then, of course, implemented by the member states, it would have a great impact on the corporate accountability across Europe. And this resolution, this is an important point, is that this resolution is based on a recent study by the European Commission, which shows that only 37 of business respondents currently conduct environmental and human rights due diligence. So, and given also the recent evidence of the connection between global brands and forced labor in China, you can see that transparency and accountability in global supply chains are the only solutions to stop direct and indirect complicity of companies in these crimes, and also to prevent these crimes. We really hope now that the European Commission can start working in this sense for this legislation, and on our part, as a civil society, we urge and we will push the European Commission to start working as soon as possible, because it's very urgent to have rules in this field.
And I think that it's quite important to also understand, because we were talking about a lot of transparency, and it is bring me to what is the role of Extinction Rebellion, which is like they always talking about say the truth. So they like, but I leave to Emily Jane to explain what's Extinction Rebellion and how Extinction Rebellion is actually working as a grassroots organization, as a grassroots activist organization with people. So my question to Emily Jane is, what's Extinction Rebellion, Fashion Action, and what do you actually do? Talking about like truth and transparency and all the action that you do.
Yeah, so Extinction Rebellion is a decentralized global environmental movement. So we call ourselves decentralized because we don't have a leader. It's not hierarchical. We don't have someone at the top telling us what to do, and it's not political. We work as a community, as a kind of network of individual rebels who all join together. So we at Fashion Action are the fashion focused sector of Extinction Rebellion. So our core principles are still the same as Extinction Rebellion, which is to tell the truth and act now. That's at the core of our messaging, is that we need our government and we need the top dogs of corporations to be telling the truth. First of all, that transparency, like Eleonora talked about, that is at the core of what we need, because if these people cannot even tell the truth about what is happening, then how can we fix it? How can we fix it if it's a web of lies and half-truths? And the fashion industry is one of the worst for this. They have so little transparency. So that's where Fashion Action really comes into play. So we're a civil disobedience, non-violent direct action group. So we protest, we do actions, we do workshops teaching people how to sew. We are on the streets, we're quite community driven. But we don't endorse violence, and we also we like to be there on the day. We're not just about lobbying for legislation. Our messaging is quite clear that as we're a community, we're not so much about providing the set in stone answer. This is what has to happen, and then all of our worries will go away and the world will be perfect. We want to give the platform to the experts who know. And even though our group, our Fashion Action, is based up of individual rebels who already work in the fashion industry, we don't claim to have all the answers. So we really, as a group, we're here to compel the fashion industry, the top dogs, the leaders, the market leaders, top corporations, and the government to tell the truth about the fashion industry and to act now. And we do that through our civil disobedience. That could be actions, protests. Some people choose to get arrested, but the majority of what we do is being there on the day in numbers. We run workshops showing people how to sew, how to repair their clothes, and telling people that there's a different way of life. And we just stand there to educate people and say, like, this is the problem that we have. These companies, they're lying to you. That's a problem. Let's draw attention to it. And we do that regardless of politics. We don't align ourselves with any one political group. Our planet is buckling under the ecological collapse, and we're really distressed by that. And so Fashion Action was launched to say, look, fashion is one of the worst polluters. That needs to change, and it won't change unless we demand it. We need to be protecting and not exploiting our planet, and we need to be protecting and not exploiting the people who are most in danger of that happening to. And a lot of the time that's your garment workers. That's the people who are picking the cotton that makes your jeans. So what we call for is less garments produced, because there is a massive problem of overproduction and then the garments being burned or thrown away. Or like Marie said, about when they end up in sale unnecessarily because they can't be sold. So massive problem with overproduction. So we're asking for less to be produced. We're asking for circular fashion. So we're asking for clothes which are made out of more simple materials which can be recycled easier. So either they're made from 100% polyester, or they're made from 100% cotton, or so that they can be recycled much easier. We're asking for honesty. We're asking for them to protect, pay, and support their garment workers. So that's what XR Fashion Action is all about. We do that through our protests and our actions and all kinds of fun stuff like that, in person and online. So that's why I'm here today.
Thank you. I've been to some of your protests, especially when it was the Fashion Week, I think in 2019. Some amazing flash mob and some amazing protests in central London. So well done.
Thank you. Yeah, we like to make them really fun. That's kind of the key point of our group, is that, like, yes, this awful thing is happening, but we want it to be engaging for people. So the flash mobbing, dances, costumes, like, especially to do with the fashion side, like, we don't want to say that fashion is awful. Not saying that creativity and expressing yourselves through your clothes is wrong. Like, most of us work in the fashion industry who are in the group, you know, our key facilitators. We love fashion. We think it's incredible. We think it's great. But the point is that you can do so much with that without killing the planet. So yeah, the costumes and things like that are really integral. So I'm really glad that you were there.
Yeah. And I actually, at what you touched different points that is actually bring me to the question that I wanted to ask to Eleonora, because you touched on the garment workers. So as a platform, as a We Think, we basically talking about the work of women, and what we're trying to do is like raise awareness about gender equality. We require gender equality in the workplace. And unfortunately, in the fashion industry, the majority of garment workers are women. Most of the time with a really low wages. And really interesting research has been doing lately, which is the report Uyghurs for Sales, which is a report that, Eleonora, you're working on, you know very well. So I want you to talk a little bit more about this report and what it contains, and basically what's the main issue that came out from this report that is related to garment workers in Xinjiang in China. Sorry for the pronunciation, I'm not able to say.
Nice, it's correct. So, Ursula, yes, Uyghur for Sale is an incredible report by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, an independent think tank. And this report was released last year, which reveals evidence that some factories across China are using forced labor, and this is affecting the global supply chain. This report estimates more than 18,000 Uyghurs, the largest Muslim minority in China, have been transferred from Xinjiang, where they live, to work in factories across China between 2017 and 2019. And some of them were sent directly from detention camps where many Uyghurs are currently arbitrarily detained. And these people are forced to work in a factory that are in the supply chain of at least 82 global brands in the technology and in the fashion industry. And what's worse, recent evidence that more than 500,000 Uyghurs are forced to work in Chinese cotton fields. And in this sense, there is a complicity of global brands, which is more important, because this not only includes the 82 the global brands exposed by the report Uyghur for Sale, but we have new evidence, and this new evidence includes the complicity of many brands, many global brands in forced labor of these people in the Chinese cotton field. And as you said, Rosa, the majority of many of these people are women. So that's why many of testimonies we have that can tell the story of what they are experiencing in Xinjiang are women with an incredible courage, because they want to show what they are suffering, what the people are suffering in Xinjiang today, in Xinjiang and in other regions across China, because this is not only happening in Xinjiang. As I said, China's government transferred this person to other regions in China.
Yeah, and when we discussed, you said that it's quite difficult to access this information because obviously China has an internal policy that make for activists as well in China really difficult to make aware the rest of the world about what is happening there, and they risk their actual life to people about what is happening. And when we were talking about transparency before of corporation, and the relationship that is between information about the sustainability of fashion brands, my question to Mary is, as a person that has been working in the retail industry, in the fashion industry for a year, is in your opinion anything you can think of that will make easier to actually make sustainable information about sustainability more accessible? So like Emily Jane was saying, it's important that brands can say the truth. It's important that brands can say what they're doing, but there are also some brands that are actually doing something positive. Do you think that they are able to share this information to everyone, and there is an effective way to give to customers, to consumers, the right information about the fashion industry?
Yeah, I think that at the moment can be quite challenging to find I don't personally think that there is that easy to find that much information. Like I said before, it is becoming a hot topic now. So you see that the industry is a bit more in focus now. And then companies, investors, consumers, they should look at different choices to then make the decisions. And sometimes there isn't enough tools available. But I think, like I said, in terms of the finance point of view, there is financial disclosure on sustainability framework, which now is going to be, before was something companies could do or not. And then, of course, to EJ's point, is sometimes can be very tricky if it's if it's a smaller company, to kind of even comply with all of this. When you work for a big company like Burberry, then you have to give as much information as you can to your investors and shareholders. So then we normally comply a lot more, and we have to be more open about what we're doing. Some other smaller companies, they either can then choose not to, or they can maybe they don't have the tools to actually do. So like in terms of like what I think they could make it better and easier, I think that if you have information, if they make the information available on their websites, for example, if you see there are plenty of like fashion brands that they are putting what are their goals, what are they working on, what are their aims, how much you can trace like the raw material. So the more information you give to the customers, then you give them additional tools to make those choices. And then you see, for example, now it's being discussed about having more information on the clothing labels. And I have seen that there was actually, took note somewhere, that they were saying that more than 43% of the customers now are already actively choosing brands based on their environmental values, according to Deloitte. So then you see that there is also a shift in terms of the actual customers. So the most like younger generations, like Gen Z, they seem to be wanting to get more information. So it's like Jay was saying, is to have this interest, to try to almost like force companies to have to make those available so you can choose. And I think this, if the customer make pressures, if the investor make pressures, if shareholders make pressure, then from a listed company like Burberry, you need to think about the interests of your shareholders. And if that's one of the main interests, then they will have to comply as much as they can. And generally, if you see most companies now, they are trying to take steps towards being more sustainable, try to become carbon neutral, try to find ways to have organic and cotton and things like this. So there is different ways that I think that it is that can improve. I think that also in terms of even us on the side of a customer, not so much working for the industry, for us to voice. I heard that there was a hashtag that was saying about where does my clothing come from. So it's just raising those questions. So the more the industry becomes wanting to make those change, those impacts, I think that this is how it would change. And I think from the company point of view, I see not just Burberry, but there are plenty of companies that they are taking steps, they are trying, but sometimes the changes are not that easy to take. It's not so simple to just simply change. So you can always try to find a ways to how you can trace everything, how you can choose your suppliers, to make sure that you are complying as much as you can, trying to make sure that, the workers in your factories are paid a good amount of money, not just what is, sometimes it can be, for what I saw in another summit, they were discussing about what is actually ethical is not sometimes just what they have to pay in the country, but what would it be in comparison to a living, wages and so on. So even for Burberry in Castleford, where we have a factory, I know that not just them, but also other areas, they try to make sure that they give the living wages, not just the minimum wages. So I think there is plenty of things that can be done, and then you can see how this can be changed, and all these implementations, I think they will should generate some changes. Or even like I mentioned before about the discount culture, I think that this, if we do maybe if there is a pressure for other more high streets, I think that this is not so applicable to luxury fashion brands. We don't have multiple seasons like this, but some of the other brands on the high street that they have, like I said before, they have so many different products being launched every single time, and encourage, like AJ was saying as well, the overproduction and overconsumption. So I think is always both sides, right? As a customer, and then also from the company point of view. So the overproduction, overconsumption, I think that everyone is guilty in this point, because I was saying, for companies, we don't want to have so much waste because it costs us, and we end up needing to maybe
So this is why it actually is a good point what you said. Obviously, the fashion industry has the responsibility on be transparent and let people know about what is happening. But then we are talking about multiple seasons. So you have a season every 2 months, especially when we're talking about fast fashion. So how we can educate ourselves as a consumer to be more sustainable? This is more a question to Emily Jane, because I think it's probably like a shift on way of thinking, a way of think about fashion. So like I read, and it's something that obviously appealed to me more, probably because I'm older, I don't know, than someone that has 15 or 16 years old or 20 years old, but like the difference between teaching kids, like new generation, the difference between styles and trends. Because obviously if you follow trends, you are forced to change your style, change your clothes every 2-3 months. While if you have your own style, you're also going to be able to keep your clothes for longer. So my question is like to related to this, is like, so imagine if, Emily Jane, you are talking to someone who knows nothing about sustainable fashion. What are some ways that you can get involved right away? What you will discuss with them?
So I think that's a really good point that you've raised about the difference between style and trend, and I think that's a really key point, is that I think sometimes people conflate being fashionable with being trendy and always buying into trends. So I think that is a really good point, especially for younger people, because so many of the clothes, especially in fast fashion that we see, they're marketed to that Gen Z, the kind of 16-year-old audience. So I think we that's definitely something that we need to teach, and that would definitely be a conversation that I would have. I think it's actually easier being in, like, having the background of being out of London and also being in London. In London, sorry, you see a lot more people who are stylish without buying into trend, which is really, really great to see. Whereas when you go into regions around the UK, which maybe aren't so much a hub of creativity and this hub of culture, we see a lot more people buying into trend and things like that, because they're trying to catch up with something that you can't catch up with. So I would definitely say, yeah, educating on the difference between trend and style is really important. My main thing that I would probably go for, my first port of call, would be to say that the clothes you already own are the most sustainable clothes. Exactly. If you already own them, that's brilliant. That you've already, you know what I mean? Like if you go and buy sustainable clothes, even if they're carbon neutral, even if they're made with 50% organic cotton and 50% recycled cotton, and all the embroidery is recycled, and brilliant, that's great, that's incredible.
The Hackney style, though. The East London style.
Yeah,
we all do sustainable fashion in this part of city. Yeah.
When we buy, that's brilliant, that's great. But even those sustainable clothes, they took energy to make, they took time to make, they took labor, they took money to make, and you're giving your money to pay for them. Even those sustainable clothes, they're not as sustainable as the ones you already own. So the first port of call would be, look at the wardrobe that you have, see what you can do with that wardrobe. Can you restyle it differently? Can you wear it differently? If you've got an old t-shirt which is faded, can you re-dye it? You can buy dyes and re-dye things which are of one color very easily. That's something that's really accessible. So my first port of call would be to cut down on your consumption. If we're talking on an individual level, consume less. Some people, they'll say that I only ever buy one t-shirt a year and I wear my jeans until there's holes in them. I'm thinking of like blokes talking about with their hardware hats. And
I don't buy clothes. Yeah, cool, okay.
But the majority of people aren't like that, and I think we're kidding ourselves if we try and say that we are. I would say that majority of people are guilty of buying things when they don't need them, and also maybe even when they don't actually want them that much. It's just because they're told that they should have them. So overconsumption on a large scale is such a big issue. So we need to cut down on frivolous spending. That then means that we have more capital then to spend on clothes which are of a really good quality, and of clothes which, if clothes are made sustainably and made ethically, they will cost more. So you need more money to pay for them. And the way that you can pay for them is if you have that more money. So if you don't spend all of your money on cheap clothes all the time, You have more money to spend on something which you're going to love, you're going to cherish, and it's going to last you a long time. Because the problem is that fashion is very classist. So Burberry, for example, very, very high prices, extortionate. Most people in England cannot pay for them. They don't have the money because 90% of people are not earning the kind of money to be able to. And you have to make priority calls. Do I eat or do I have a nice coat with an overcheck?
Do I pay my rent?
Yeah. I you know, everyone I can imagine would love to be able to wear really nice luxury made clothes all the time. It's just not,
would be my, yeah, you know, like that kind of stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, and that's the problem again, is that we have a massive classism issue in the UK. It's ingrained through centuries, but fashion itself is very classist. So I would definitely stress that it's about doing what you can with what you have. Your accessibility in terms of, you know, do you have a disability that stops you being able to go out and buy clothes in person, or do you have an accessibility issue in terms of you live really far away and you can only afford public transport, and then the nearest shops to you are only Primark, H&M, whatever. And also money. If you don't have that capital to spend, then you can't spend it. So it's about finding the best options for you within those capabilities. And then in terms of a practical sense of a day-to-day, something that I would also stress to people is ascertaining the skills that we have in mending the clothes that we already own. So again, that thing of the clothes that we already own in our wardrobe are the most sustainable clothes. So what happens when they get a hole in them, or what happens when the dye fades on them? We don't just chuck them out. So years and years ago, people they couldn't, because they didn't have the money to just go out and buy another cheap coat. So we repaired them. And we're slowly losing that, which is such a shame. So I would really, really stress to people about the importance of being able to mend your clothes. Can you sew on a button? Can you re-hem your trousers if the hem falls down? Can you stitch up the side seam? Can you put a patch on something? Or even you can go all the way and become an upcycling designer. We're seeing that a lot now, of people taking clothes and turning them into something great. And I think that's brilliant. So I think overall, cutting down your consumption, sticking with the clothes that you have. When you do buy as sustainable as you can, buy what you can within your realms. Okay, live within your means, and also that ascertaining: can you sew, can you stitch? So from a practical side, and then just in terms of education, like if someone came to me off of the street and said, you know, what are the most important points? I'm not going to barrage them with millions of statistics, and I'm not going to, you know, go at them, because I'm not going to be that person, because it doesn't go in. They don't care, because they just go, no, you're just shouting at me. I'm not interested. Don't talk to me. And we want people to care. So I would educate on the most key and current points. So that's the emissions. I would educate on the Ouija scandal, because that's a genocide now. That's a genocide. There's forced sterilization.
And it it came out like lately, also in the UK, because in 2019, it came out like really terrible news about the production of product from Boohoo, from garment works in UK that were paid like lower the minimum wage, not even under the living wage. And it was a big scandal. But the question is, and this I think is Eleonora can answer this for sure, why? So obviously here in UK was a mass coverage about that. Everyone from the Guardian to the Times, everyone was talking about this thing. But why, when we are thinking about the fashion industry, and why does the fashion industry care less about garment workers in other countries? So in Europe, if something like that happen, is a scandal, is like a massive report, massive attention from media, and it's great. But why, when it's happened in other country, we always understand and we know about that later, or we barely know, or it has to be some activist that is going there and do a documentary about it to let people know that something terrible is happening? Why do you think it's like that?
Basically, Rosella, this is because there's no transnational legislation which can protect human rights of workers of these countries. Because First of all, if a company, for example, is based in Europe, in the UK, or in the US, where legislation to protect workers' rights are in place, but this company operates in countries where legislation maybe exists, but they are ineffective, then it's up to the company's willingness to care about the workers' rights. And Western companies, mostly in the fashion industry, have long relied on outsourcing their their production to countries which have a poor labor condition, and in many cases where the rule of law doesn't exist at all. So without a legislation which can be effective in other countries, a legislation with extraterritorial effects, the majority of the companies will always choose profit over human rights. And this is so sad, but this is the reality. And in addition, there is another issue. And in many cases, as we have recently seen in China, fashion companies like H&M, for example, are facing now an aggressive boycott campaign in China just for expressing their concerns over the issue of forced labor that I've said before. And this is incredible. And so we should understand that being on the side of human rights, when you work in countries where these values are not recognized, comes at a very high cost. So legislation with the aim to protect human rights of workers in countries where there is no rule of law, for example, Pakistan, India, China, also is also useful for companies. It's useful for everyone, for consumers, for companies, for workers, in order to protect the rights of workers, in order to secure justice for the victims, in order to guarantee fair products for consumers. This is extremely important, and we absolutely need rules with extraterritorial effects. Otherwise, nobody will care about others' rights.
Wow, that is so sad if you think about. So I think probably, as Mary was saying before, as a consumer, we probably have the power to decide. And so if we have enough information, like, for example, I know that obviously this is not on the main channel, but like a conversation like this can give to people, could give to our attendees an idea of what is the situation out there. And based on this information, you can probably from today start to take a stand and take a decision, because I know that obviously we need a bigger law, a bigger, like the impact of bigger company to change the law and like to change the actual fashion industry. But it's starting also from, it's both sides, like Mary was saying before. So when we are talking about, because before Emily was touching the point of like the difference, we were talking about the difference between style and trends, and usually when you are able to buy luxury fashion is because you are in a way you like you have the ability to be a little bit more sustainable in that space. So in which luxury labels are setting the standard for ecological and ethical fashion, Mary? So if you have any brands that you can bring as an example that is actually setting the trend and is doing something good for the planet, even if they're not quite affordable, but just to give an idea of what is happening out there, because it's also good to bring some positive example.
Yeah, I think in the luxury industry, I think in general, not just the luxury industry, I think there is a lot of areas to look at. There is, they've been mentioned here. So, and I don't think it's a surprise to anyone, because we know that there is a lot, like I said before, there were so many other industries that have been in the eye of the media and being discussed, and then there being a lot of lobbying to kind of get those regulations on in place. And then this industry in particular hasn't been in their space for a very long time. But I do see a lot, like, you know, lots of brands trying to do different things, trying to find different ways. I saw the other day, for example, that H&M was offering like a suit for an interview, like a, you know, just learning. There's actually should solve from like buying things that you just need to meet for like a one-off interview. Or you see, for example, there was other brands that I saw, they were like doing the renting program, so you can actually set up and do, and it's not, it would be like a between the high street and then the sole luxury, like a Burberry. So then you would be able to sign up and then have this clothes that would come to you, would wear a few times and then send it back. I think that becomes already a more sustainable approach, which is Ralph Lauren is doing this. So then you actually create a bit more space for people to be able to use. It may not be like EJ was saying, in terms of sometimes it's not everyone that can afford this, but I think that of course Burberry is a very high-end price, and I appreciate most people like cannot afford it, but it's not even about this. Sometimes we buy so many like cheap piece of clothes that they don't last anyway, and then sometimes it's better to pay a bit more. I'm not talking about buying from Burberry, but buying something slightly more expensive that will last and will be, you know, that's gonna have like in your wardrobe for like years. Which I have clothes that I have for like 15 years, like there's like in my wardrobe, and then
me too.
this is great. But I think there's like, for example, of course at Burberry, because I work there, I see there was like many different goals. They've been doing a lot of commitments in terms of, you know, before I joined, they have stopped like burning inventory, which was something that I'm not like completely big in fashion, so for me I didn't even know there was a normal practice. But in luxury industry is like, it seems to be like a normal practice, and Burberry has been
actual old collection. You burn out an entire collection.
I would burn anything, because I understand from the point of view of the company that very like from the business point of view, that if you don't want to get like a, you know, distribute to charities, and then you would lose the procedures of the brand has. But of course this doesn't justify, but it seems to be that, you know, some brands still do. But before I even joined Burberry, they have made this official commitment not to burn, so it forces us to be more intelligent in terms of how much like inventory we're going to produce, because we know that we're not going to be doing this and so on. But Burberry has like other things, like they've been making some ranges that they're using like fishing nets and pieces of plastic to then do a whole range of more sustainable products, which I think is great. Like you see this in other brands, or like Stella McCartney, that because she's been like a vegetarian for years, so she's been trying to being more like a pioneer, trying to lead on this. And I'm sure that there is things on her side that is not perfect, but even when I was listening to the summit that she was taking part, she was saying that sometimes it becomes very difficult, even because the number of options that they have available in terms of colors, material is so like limited. It's not something that there is out there. And then I know that Burberry is trying to, in one of the things that even took note, that they are trying to become like the leading in terms of creating new materials that will be more sustainable, developing tomorrow's materials. That was one of the points, or stop using fur and so on. So you see different brands that they are trying to even get the second hand, like to resell. And so I think that there is lots of steps which are moved towards the right direction. I think there's just personally is that how fast are we moving? This is like completely my opinion, because we have like so much of like a mission, and then now we have by 2050 that I think it's 2050 the girls can confirm.
We have much time, to be honest. So
yeah, it's just like, are we doing the right pace? Are we doing enough? Can we do more? And I think that then it's just a mix of, you know, Leonora, like an AJ, that they do this kind of work to try to bring these things to the eye of the media, to get like these things to be noticed, to try to help people to be more conscious and so on. Although I work in fashion, I'm the one that don't tend, I'm like, EJ is gonna like to hear this, I'm the one that don't tend to buy much stuff. I actually am quite like conscious in another way, that try to think, do I really need to buy? Or, you know, like sometimes I just think, apparently they say 30% of the wardrobe is only what we wear. So like before you even try to buy, try to see if you can restyle yourself. But I think there is positive steps. It's just more like, are we moving in the right pace, not so much the right direction?
Because we start to move in some way in the right direction, but I think it's the pace that is quite slow. So this is bringing me to my last question to AJ, which is, are there any collective action that you would suggest? Because obviously it's something that we need to think as a community, as a collective. So there is anything as a collective of people that we can do for this?
I think that there's maybe not one movement in terms of one company's movement or one organization's movement or one charity's movement. I'd say the larger movement in whole is what we need. Touching on what Marie said to do with, we talk a lot at the moment about fast fashion and the dangers of fast fashion, but we don't talk a lot about the greenwashing, and especially the dangers from luxury fashion, the implications of luxury fashion, because a lot of the luxury fashion houses, including Burberry, which doesn't use fur anymore but still uses exotic skins, that is still a common practice. Crocodile skin, alligator skin, very common. The fashion industry as a whole is really bad for greenwashing. And it makes it very hard to tell what progress has actually been done, what action is going to be taken, because brands, for example, H&M will say, oh, we have this conscious collection and it's got a top made of recycled cotton, aren't we great? And then they're selling 3,000 t-shirts made of the cheapest cotton that they could buy, virgin material, not recycled, not organic. And luxury fashion is just as guilty. So I would say that even as a movement, we need to take the conversation away from just fast fashion, and we need to look at fashion as a whole. Yes, luxury fashion tends to produce less, but still ready to wear is fast fashion. So luxury fashion houses are complicit in that. So as a movement in general, I would say that we need to look at fashion as a whole, and I wouldn't necessarily say that people need to align themselves with one thing. We could look at Fashion Revolution. They do the Who Made My Clothes and the Fashion Revolution week, and that's great, and that's really, really built up steam, and a lot of people are behind that. Then you have XR Fashion Action, what we do, which is the worldwide actions. We have not just the UK, we have France, the Netherlands, South Africa. I think we have one in Australia now too. So we're quite big on that. We're quite global, and we do our online actions. But I think a lot of it is about seeing what appeals to you and what you can do. I would say just get behind the movement in general. Do your reading, read as many books as you can, join clubs, see what's around you. Do you want to do an online thing? What's your capabilities? Because you could offer free sewing workshops, for example. That could be your contribution to the movement in whole. Or you could run clothes swaps. You could start a book club, which talks exclusively on environmental books. So it's not just about protesting and getting arrested or holding up a sign on Instagram and saying, I made your clothes. Like that doesn't mean a lot if there's nothing behind that. So especially because there is this thing of there is strength in numbers, and we vote with our feet. And if we don't give them our coin, they are stuffed. That's the thing that investors, especially like with Burberry, because it's a listed company, they have stockholders, shareholders, and their investors will boot out a CEO if they are not acting in the business's best interests. And if they see that the people who are buying their stock will not buy it if they are using wages slave labor, if they keep using exotic skins, if, for example, like Burberry at the moment, selling t-shirts for £400 with a shark on it, but it's still made of virgin cotton, for example, when there's other brands, a brand which I know, called To Be Frank, and they make t-shirts 100% recycled material for £25, and I'm like,
yeah,
where's that at? So I would say it's not just about joining one particular movement, but doing what you can. Are you gonna, I guess it's just deciding what you can do and seeing what you can do. Do you have a particular skill that would aid the movement? Do you just want to be there as feet on the day? But definitely, I think vote with your feet. As much as it is about, we need to get the industries themselves to change, we need to get the government to change because they hold the power. We have to give them the incentive to change, because especially our current government in the UK don't care because they're in the system. So they're not going to give the incentive. So we have to, because like I said, these companies, they want your money. And if they see that they are losing your money because they are not sustainable, then they will be like, crap, we have to be sustainable. Yeah, we have to change. So vote with your feet is one of the best things to do. Vote with your money. But really just get behind the movement in whatever way you can. Have a look at your local groups, see what's around you. Check out the hashtags on Instagram is the best thing, because a lot of the movements don't have websites, or they won't come up high up in the search. So yeah, just have a little browse through and do whatever you can. But definitely, I would say, get involved with the activism, get involved with the movement, because the best thing you can do is get stuck in, really, and not just sit idle and be like, well, I don't buy that stuff, so it's all right. Like, educate people around you, really bring people into it. And the more the merrier.
Great. Thank you, Emily Jane. That is really, actually, it's made me think. I mean, I've tried to get involved, but, it made me think that I probably should do more. And this is a question for Eleonora. How can we raise awareness about the condition of garment workers in Asia, but in all the other countries that we mentioned tonight?
In general, media attention is crucial. It's crucial, as well as public campaigns through social networks, and everything which can help in disseminating the results of independent investigations, of reports just like Uyghur for Sale, and another incredible report always by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which is called the Xinjiang Data Project. And I highly recommend to have a look at this report, because they are doing an incredible work in exposing the truth, in exposing data. You can find all the satellite images, all the data from China's government, and not only about the forced labor, but forced labor is just a part of a wide repression which is happening in Xinjiang, a repression which involves other abuses like forced sterilization of women, like forced political indoctrination, mass surveillance, and so on. So the point is being informed, just like Emily Jane was saying, being informed and getting involved. And so in order to get involved, you need to be informed. And now we have so many evidence, we have so many reports, we can rely on data from credible NGOs, from academic researchers,
Can you mention any NGO that we can find information about garment workers or report?
Okay, it depends on the field. So there are many NGOs. For example, the Australian Strategic Policy is now focusing on China, and there you can find a list of reports, and you can rely on their data. And also Human Rights Watch, and we as the Italian Federation for Human Rights, we are all also publishing reports. So and we are working in a sort of partnership. Normally we need to work together. So maybe on the website, on our website, you can also find other websites, other NGOs contacts. But first of all, I can say yes, Human Rights Watch, Australian Strategic Policy, and also investigative journalists, because the BBC is doing a great work in uncovering human rights violations in Xinjiang. So you can easily find out many information on YouTube by BBC and CNN.
I'm actually found the news, and I read the news on BBC. When I saw that you have done the job around that report, I got in touch with you. So it's true on BBC. BBC is covering a lot. Well, but I'm conscious of time, and I'd like to know if there is any question from the audience in the meantime. And then I'm going to ask my last question to Mari. How do you think, so what's your relation with sustainable fashion, and what do you suggest as a person that works in fashion, what you can do in order to make a change?
I think that, well, like I was saying before, because I have my like yogi side, so not just on the actual fashion, but like what I consume in terms of food and just making those choices. I think that there is lots of different things, not so much about the luxury industry, but even more as a consumer, and then seeing the sides. I understand that there is always lots of areas for improvement, like EJ was saying, and there are other concerns, like Eleonora has mentioned. I think that in terms, from my side, I am the type of person that I will try to make sure that I buy only if I need. I try to buy more durable, like items that I think will, that will last. As a person, if the price is very, very, no, it doesn't need to be the most expensive one, like a Burberry trench coat, but when you see that t-shirt costs £3, that should raise like some like a question mark, so it's like you as a consumer, of course, I can see from the cost of a product, there is no way that you can produce that, and then that the workers probably are not even getting the minimum and so on. So of course you don't need to understand all the cost of production, so then just make some of them like conscious choices. So if you can maybe buy an item that we'll use for a long time, and you think that you can maybe swap with your friends, or just maybe think twice. I think that for me, it's just in everything, what I consume, what I buy, food or clothing, just try to make sure that you think if you actually really need, or if you're not really sure, maybe just use one of the services that you can just rent, or go to one of those vintage markets and buy something secondhand. So do your share, and then if you do want to buy an expensive a one-off item every now and then, there is nothing wrong. We all do that sometimes, but it's just maybe trying to balance out and then try to do your part.
Okay, thank you very much, Marida. It's quite useful. And we have a question from Paola Gaffurini. My question: how can fashion industry effectively partner up with international organizations like the EU, which is currently negotiating trade and investment agreements with China? Who wants to take this? So how basically the fashion industry is partnered up with international organizations like the EU to negotiate trend and investment agreement with China. So I believe what Paula wants to say is how we can make sure, how it's possible that the fashion industry can actually work together with international organizations to change the trade and investment in China.
I think it's hard because of how much corruption there is, and because of the political system that countries outside of the EU are operating. I mean, we have enough corruption in this country, but if you go to places like India and you go to China, especially if you look at the protests that have been happening nationwide in India recently with the farmers, it's a completely different system. I think it will take time, and that's tough. That's so. I think it's hard because I think we apply our view of the world onto other situations. So we look at things through our lens, when the problem is that if that was happening in our country, it could be sorted easier. But because their governments are very unwilling to change, it's not really in their interests a lot of the time. I think that's why it can be really, really hard to get around that. I don't know if Eleonora or Marie would want to add onto that. That's kind of what I can input into that.
Thank you, Emily. I think is valuable, your answer. I don't know if you Eleonora, want to add something to that.
I think that the problem is still the same, the lack of transparency. Since we don't solve this problem, we cannot imagine that companies or governments, as Emily Jane was saying, they won't do anything. And another important thing is that we should understand that political will it strictly depends on civil society, on media attention, on our mobilization. So if we don't start to be aware of what is happening and push our governments and push institutions also the relevant institutions like United Nations should be pushed to move forward. So we need to start in this direction and solve the problem of the lack of transparency, because many times companies are not aware of what happened in their supply chain.
Yeah.
So the problem is that, for example,
sometimes
when Rigor for State was published, many companies have been informed, of course, but many of them were not aware of the situation, because there's a lack of transparency in all these the supply chain, most of all in China. First of all, the supply chain is absolutely not transparent.
Yeah, I think definitely we need our government, and we need our government to pressure their government, because they are the ones with the punching weight. It's all well and good us like making an infographic targeting another country, but like India, they don't really care about that. So we need the power which will sway them is international power. So like Eleonora says, we need the UN to start caring, and we need our government to really be applying the pressure to them, and also the heads of the corporations to say, look, if you can't guarantee transparency and you can't guarantee
my
you're not using Uyghur labor, we'll make them elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think there's like, for example, if you compare places like India, or because like I'm from Brazil, I can say, other countries like that, they don't have sometimes the same regulations. They don't have the same system. So sometimes some of the bigger companies from Europe or UK, they sometimes they take advantage of the situation. They don't need
it really does.
And it can be complicated.
Why
it should start with us, right? It should start with the big companies that they think that they need to pay the right fair salary, not just the minimum that is acceptable there, or because then it's not so visible. I think that the transparency point that Nora was saying, all we lack is transparency. It's like if there is more regulation to make it clear the whole full supply chain, and it's a mix, like Nora also said, and I mentioned at the beginning of the chats today, is that sometimes you have so many tiers on the supply chain, and you try to trace as much as you can. But sometimes the vendor of the vendor of the vendor of the vendor.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's how much like can you really like do? I think it is like due diligence. Like they're like, for example, for the companies, bigger companies, like they are more in the media, they will do. Other not so much. But it's just trying to make sure that you check your suppliers, they actually match the values, they are doing the bits, and then their suppliers are also like in the same like a kind of like a values, that they make sure that they are choosing the right partner. So for example, Burberry is very like, they have a list of suppliers, any like a one-off, like they will see whether it's actually ticking those boxes. They will not just use any supplier. So you have a list of preferred suppliers and so on. So this is, I think, the small steps. But in terms of transparency, I think that if that becomes in the more like a visible to everyone, and then companies can have to disclose the full supply chain and so on, then we are the ones that need to implement. We can't expect India or Brazil or China to then suddenly come with like the same level of like regulation as UK and Europe.
Exactly. But the thing is that everything starting from there, the reason why the majority of big brands from Europe and US are moving their production in countries where the regulation are not transparent is because they know that they can actually do whatever they want and pay workers 10 times less than a worker in their own country. So it's obviously that the reason, and we can actually pressure the government, like we were saying, to make them a pressure on those countries, but it's basically a big corporation responsibility to change this system, because it's where everything started. Before, like we are talking about 50, 60 years ago, probably more, the majority of production of clothes were in Europe. We don't have any more people that work in like as worker, as a farmer here in the UK, like in Europe. So the entire work system changed. We now just move and switch to other country. Unfortunately, poor country where people is actually probably desperate to find a job, so they can take advantage of that situation. I think that's really important to also like
in terms of lowering CO2 emissions, the more that we can produce locally, the better.
Yeah.
Because then we're not shipping it halfway across the world to go, oh, I need the buttons added onto this. I'll ship this to China. Actually, now I need a zipper put onto it. Let's go back to India. Oh, no, I need this on. Let's go to Malaysia quickly. Like, the more that we can produce locally, it ensures that we have to pay them, because like the scandal with Boohoo, for example, because our regulations are higher, means that the companies would have to ensure that those people are paid more. Also, it cuts down on CO2 emissions, but exactly like you say, those companies have taken advantage of the fact and they move their manufacturing abroad,
it's
because
for
they
every
know
single
that they can pay them less and they get more profit and they make
absolutely
more money.
it's that, because they can make more profit. Like if you're talking about the big fashion label, the Italian big fashion label, from Gucci to Prada to Miu Miu, they all produce in Asia. Before, the production were in Italy, and the reason why the made in Italy became so famous, we don't have any made in Italy anymore. I mean, nothing is produced in Italy anymore. Everything is made in Bangladesh, in India, in China. So, and we are talking about bags or shoes that cost £1,000. So the profit on that products are enormous. So it's like, we can talk about this for hours, and I'm conscious that all of you have probably now after an hour and a half almost quite tired to be here, but I want to thank you, every single one of you in this conversation. Eleonora, Maris, and Emily Jane, you've been amazing. Thank you for your time, your passion, and what you actually do every day, because I understand that it's not just like a passion for an issue, but it's like having the courage to take a stand, which is not easy, and it's not easy to change your life, to adapt and change in order to stand for something. So thank you very much, and thank you for everyone that has been in this, participated this webinar tonight, and I hope to see you face to face. So I will let you know when we're going to start the live meetup here in London, and hopefully we're going to see in person very soon. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.